Okay, so hi everyone. Welcome officially to the first philanthropy stakeholder group of the SURF effort. I don't even know if that's the right way to use that acronym, but we're here, we're ready, we're excited. We are also very appreciative to have California Forward here to do the official presentation. So the goal for today is to really provide philanthropy with an overview of the SURF effort, the SURF initiative, what the HRTC is doing, and the goal for philanthropy stakeholders over the next year and a half or so. So this is really just a level setting of kind of what it is and what's going on, and then we'll use this moving forward to formalize our stakeholder group that, as I shared, is co-led by the Orange County Community Foundation and OCG, and see what we need to do from here moving forward. So with that, I will now hand it over to the California Forward team. We didn't rehearse this, so I'm not quite sure which one of the team I'm handing it over to. So I'm just going to say to California Forward, and somebody else can jump in.
You can hand it over to me. And so I'll take it from here. I'm hoping that you guys receive the slides so that you can put them up. If not, I will try sharing from my screen.
Yes, I did just see the slides. Give me 1 second. Let me pull them from my email and I can get them up.
Perfect. And while we're waiting, I'm Lavere Alexander, Chief Strategy Officer for California Forward. And there are probably other members of the team here. If you're here, California Forward, please introduce yourself. If I'm by myself, that's bad.
Oh, no,
I think I'm here.
We're here with you, Lavera. Hi, everyone. Annalisa with Regional Stewardship Manager with California Forward. And I'll pass to my colleagues, Steph and Erica.
Thanks, Annalisa, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steph Gerbic. I'm the Associate Director of Development here at California Forward. And I will pass to Erica.
Hi, thank you. My name is Erica Chavez, and I am the Development Manager. It's so nice to meet you all that I haven't met yet.
And that may be all of us at this point. So we can get started with the presentation. We can share the slides now.
Yes, sorry guys, my computer is not letting me open it. Anna got it as well. She is going to, oh, Anna did not get it. Anna's gonna pull it up as soon as I forward it to her.
No worries.
Although it might just be easier if you want to just, I mean, if you have it on your computer, you can just operate it as well. It's whatever is easiest for you.
And I'm trying to do that, but the share screen button is grayed out, which usually means you can't access it for some reason. So let's see. Yeah, it's odd. It's usually green, but it's gray.
It says all participants can share, so I'm not quite sure why. All right, well, Anna can pull it up in just a second. My computer is for some reason telling me it can't open this file. There we go.
Perfect.
And Lisa, thank you.
Perfect. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Community Economic Resilience Fund today, SURF. You've probably heard it over and over at this point. SURF came into existence in 2021, but prior to that, we were advancing legislation that actually gave way to SURF at that point in time. That legislation started in 2019 and continued forward until we got to SURF. So I'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later. So if we can advance to the next slide. This will provide a little bit of background here so that you kind of understand where all of this came from. So in 2019, we partnered with the Newsom administration for Regions Rise Together. That was an initiative that was to kick off at that time what was being considered this kind of novel way of doing economic development, region by region. The idea was that the region was large enough for there to be some type of transformative impact, but small enough to be inclusive. And so when that initiative kicked off in 2019, you started to see different processes moving forward throughout the state in various regions. There were some processes that had been ongoing up to that point, like Drive in Fresno, that really received a new kick, when everything started to catalyze around the Regions Rise Together piece. And so there was this movement that was building throughout the state around regional inclusive economic development. And what is that? It's the creation and execution of strategies that create more high-paying and promising jobs, that cultivate social equity and environmental sustainability for jurisdictions that share economic connections. It really is about making sure that we're bringing community into this space and lifting up those voices so that they're at the table and participating. It prioritizes meaningful community engagement, including decision-making processes, really thinking about how you don't just get people to the table, but you activate them so that they are decision makers as they're advocating for the things that matter in their communities. And there is a multi-sector collaborative approach that shows up in all of these processes. And so those are really the tenets of regional inclusive economic development as it started to move forward under Regions Rise Together. Next slide. And so in 2021, we received a call from the governor's office letting us know that the efforts that had been advanced previously through AB 3205 and AB 106, which came out of the California Economic Summit, had now given way to the Community Economic Resilience Fund, and wanted to let us know that the efforts that we were involved in, as well as all of our partners across the state, would now show up as SURF. And originally, SURF was a $750 million fund that was established by the state and administered by the state SURF leadership team, consisting of these various agencies, to really move forward these processes throughout the state, region by region. It was eventually whittled down to $600 million. A bulk of that was set aside for planning. The rest was set aside for implementation, but it was still a very large fund of money to support this effort. Just to give you context, when we initially started moving forward this type of legislation, the ask was very small. We were asking the state to put in maybe $20 to $30 million to pilot some of these processes across the state to see how they would work. And so we were very surprised, pleasantly so, when we realized that it was going to be a much bigger pot. Next slide, please. So the objectives of SURF are, as you can see here, to promote a sustainable and equitable recovery from COVID-19 that creates high quality and accessible jobs for all Californians. It's to support the development of regional economic roadmaps that invest in industries that will thrive in a carbon neutral future and build sustainable economic growth, align and leverage state, federal, philanthropic, and private sector investments to maximize recovery efforts and catalyze long-term economic resilience, and integrate the priorities of community residents into regional planning processes. When we first started talking about SURF, we were talking about this as a launch pad. This was not an initiative that was going to, be one and done. We were really looking at SURF as an opportunity to make sure that we were coming into these regions, we were launching these processes, and that we were building upon SURF as we moved through this space year after year to really make sure that this was going to be lasting change that would impact the region for years and years to come. Next slide, please. So you'll see here that SURF is broken down into two phases. The first phase is planning, $65 million total set up to be divided among the 13 regions to really support one HRTC, foster partnerships and collaboration, the development of regional economic plans. Planning efforts will inform regional investment opportunities during phase 2 of the program, and $20 million allocation for California and Native American tribes. This phase really focuses on the data and the strategy. And then there's phase 2, implementation, in which there's $500 million total set aside to fund the implementation projects that come out of the planning phase. And in that space, you see the demonstration of proposed impacts to disinvested communities. It's to demonstrate community support, promote state climate goals, support labor standards and job quality, demonstrate clear role in regional strategy, and complement existing funding sources. Applicants for phase 2 implementation grants must participate during the phase 1 planning phase or receive a letter of support from the HRTC to be eligible for funding. This phase focuses on projects. So all the work that's happening in the planning phase is going to manifest and show up in the implementation phase through projects. Next slide, please. So SURF's regions, there are 13 of them, really carved out by the state, are designed to promote economic development and maintain consistency with existing efforts. All 13 regions will receive planning and implementation dollars through competitive processes. The SURF regions are listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are 13 of them, as I mentioned before. And Orange County, you'll see listed there, is one of the regions that received SURF money. Next slide, please. So here is a timeline of SURF, how it started and where we're trying to end up when it comes to the end of phase 2 and phase 1. The SURF SFP release, May of 2022, informational webinar that really brought everyone up to speed as to where the state was and how the region should be preparing. You had the notice of intent to apply. A lot of regions did let the state know that they were interested in applying and others did not. And so we had some surprises in that space when it came to who was going to be going after SURF funds. Then there was the planning phase solicitation period that closed. Then the state went into the scoring process, and this is where there was a bit of a delay when it came to the HRTCs being named region by region, because there were some competitive applications in some of these regions. The scoring process took a little longer. You had a lot of these regions that had to go into an interview phase with the state, in some cases several interviews with the state before they decided on who was going to hold the table. And then you had the announcement of the grantees in October of 2022. Then there was the release of the economic development pilot project for public comment. This was a space that was always kind of carved out that got lost in the conversation when SURF was rolling out. We always knew that there would be some money set aside for some pilot projects. We just didn't know where that money would show up and when it would show up. But that money did get released for usage in November of 2022. Then there was the release of economic development pilot project, the final guidelines and solicitation that happened after that public comment period. That was in January of 2023. And then there was the close of that period. While this was happening, you had the regions preparing to move into the planning phase, for SURF, making sure that they had their reports ready to go. That was 60 days from the execution of the contract. And then there was the regional plan part 1 that was due August 31st, 2023, or will be due in August 31st of 2023. And then regional plan part 2 that will be due in June of 2024. The implementation project final guidelines and solicitation release anticipated 2023. And then the tribal funding opportunity final guidelines and solicitation release anticipated 2023. One thing to note here is that these dates have been in flux since the very beginning. There was a huge delay at the beginning of SURF. It didn't roll out as quickly as the state had hoped, as well as the regions had been hoping that it would roll out earlier. So you'll see that the timeline to spend the SURF dollars specifically for phase 1 didn't end up being as long as everyone had anticipated. There were a few months shaved off of that. May show up at some point later on, but right now, each of the regions are working within the guidelines that the state has put before them now. Next slide, please. So the opportunity. You hear people talk about SURF as a once in a generation, and sometimes you hear once in a lifetime opportunity to maximize funding by synchronizing SURF with current and new strategic funding opportunities. SURF was always created to work in conjunction with other pots of funding. In particular, the regional K through 16 education collaborative grant process. That was also workshopped at the summit while SURF was being born. And then you had the regional climate collaboratives always a part of the space as we were talking about the money that was going to be released by the state, but then it too became a thing like SURF and like the regional K through 16 collaboratives around the same time. And so those pots are supposed to work together to make sure that the money is maximized in the region and that we're thinking about long-term transformative change over time instead of just getting money into the region one time and hoping that you can build something within that short time frame that's going to be lasting. You also have federal grants that were being released through the EDA that some of the regions secured, large grants that were also being distributed to make sure that what was going on with SURF had as much impact as possible. And so when you look at those pieces together, you can see how all of these different pots are supposed to be strategic in nature and how they're really supposed to work together to make sure that the funding does what it's supposed to do in each of these regions. And then that last bullet there really relates to you, and that's philanthropic funding. Anytime we've talked about these types of opportunities coming from the state, we always knew that there would need to be a philanthropic component in order for this to work. And SURF is no different. And so we look at that space, the philanthropic space, to really help us to identify the gap and to make sure that those who should be gathering around the table but can't for a variety of reasons, capacity and what have you, that philanthropy is stepping in to assist in that space. Next slide, please. So the role of the philanthropic sector in SURF, and this is really, high level. There are so many different bullets that could be listed here. Since SURF rolled out, we've seen, philanthropy show up in a variety of ways. And so just keep in mind, these are some of the things that we think are going to be easy for you to kind of move forward, but there are other things that may come up as we continue to collaborate and think through this space. So one of the roles is to leverage philanthropic resources to maximize regional impact. In addition to that, build funding pipelines to sustain SURF efforts beyond SURF funding. As I said before, SURF is not supposed to be the end. It's supposed to be a bit of a beginning for a lot of these regions. Advance equity and elevate voices from communities of color, marginalized and disinvested populations, and other underrepresented demographics in Orange County. Facilitate conversations on community and regional priorities and challenges. When we wrote the trailer bill language for SURF, we were very intentional about making sure that we called out that community voices needed to be centered in this initiative and that we had to do additional work to make sure that we were lifting up those voices. Next slide, please. So the immediate next steps for the philanthropic sector are as follows. Advocate for and share SURF information and resources with grantees, donors, investors, community partners, and other stakeholders. Make sure that people know about SURF. We were surprised that a year and a half into the space, there were people who were still saying, we don't know what SURF is. We don't know what it's supposed to do. We don't know how to participate. And we figure that that's still happening in some spaces. So making sure that you are sharing the information and bringing your peers to the table so that they can also be a part of this work is something that we're going to always encourage. Consider supporting capacity building and technical assistance efforts to ensure community-based orgs and other non-traditional economic development orgs have the necessary tools to engage in inclusive economic development work. This goes back to one of the things that I mentioned earlier. There are groups that are learning about economic development through SURF. They've never engaged before, but they want to engage. There are those who are always active in their communities and want to make sure that they're lifting up the priorities that matter to their people. And so we want to make sure that they have the funds to get to a meeting, to advocate for their needs and not feel as if they have to choose between attending a meeting and childcare. And so supporting capacity building and technical assistance efforts, that's going to be a really big space for philanthropy to kind of show up and ensure that these orgs can come to the table and lead and advocate for their needs. Get involved with the California Forward Work Group, advancing inclusive regional economies, going beyond SURF. Initially, I mentioned the two pieces of legislation that preceded SURF, AB 3205 and AB 106. Those two pieces were born out of the Regions Rise Together initiative, but were moved forward through the work group at the California Economic Summit. And so we have stood up another work group that's going to be focusing on what happens after SURF. How do we make sure that we have the legislation in place, the practices on the ground that are going to support the efforts that are moving forward through SURF, beyond SURF. So that's one of the things that we keep calling out and encouraging people to participate in. Attend the 2023 California Economic Summit. This year is going to be in Indian Wells, October 11th to the 13th. That's where the work of the work group really shows up and is on display, and people get to see what has been happening as all of the different people in the work group have been meeting throughout the year, mainly through June through October, to really plan what the agenda is going to be, what are the activities that are going to be moved forward at the summit. And then after the summit, that's where the real work begins. That's where you will see the things that are lifted up at the summit move forward through a variety of ways. And so calling that out, because that is something that we're always encouraging people to think about attending, because it really is a space where work gets done. Also, join the California Forward SURF bi-monthly community of practice. This was stood up about a year ago at the request of some of those who were anticipating holding tables for SURF and wanting to create a community where their peers could come together and share, solutions to problems, challenges that they're facing, really do some brainstorming. And so that group has really, been a resource for those who are holding these tables and are trying to make sure that they're doing the best job they can to be inclusive and to bring others from their regions, from their communities to the space. So that is something that we're encouraging you to attend bi-monthly, and it's a virtual gathering. It's not something that you need to do in person. And then to continue to attend these types of gatherings, when it comes to SURF, and making sure that you're attending the philanthropic meetings and virtual calls to share best practices and report on the progress. Next slide. So longer term next steps for the philanthropic sector. Continue to collaborate with regional SURF partners on a multi-year effort to fund large-scale, multi-sector inclusive economic development initiatives. Organize philanthropic consortia to pool resources to maximize local and regional impact, and develop funding models to help Orange County communities achieve greater shared prosperity. As I mentioned before, this is not one and done. It's not a short-term initiative. It was never built that way. It was built to be long-term, to catalyze long-term, and to make sure that the work that started through SURF continues long after SURF. And so these are some of the things that we're keeping in mind as we're moving through the work and looking long-term at what we're hoping will manifest as a result of this work. Next slide, please. So I'm showing you this graphic. This is a piece that came out of the summit as well in Bakersfield. It was done by a visual note taker, and each of the work groups had someone doing this kind of work, had a visual note taker assigned. And so what was happening in real time was that the note taker was building out this image as people from the work group were lifting up recommendations, some challenges, pain points that we needed to address, and really thinking about what SURF was kind of showing up as in that moment and what they were hoping SURF would continue to be long-term. And so this is the type of work that comes out of that work group. We make sure that it's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun, and it's visual. It really is, something that allows people to see things kind of manifest in the space in real time. And so this was one of those things that was new to the summit last year, and we'll continue to use it as we move forward. But wanted to share this here just so you can get a sense of what comes out of that space as people come together to kind of think through the next steps of this initiative. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to also include this so that you have this available to you. And I'm going to ask if we can put the link in the chat box for people to grab until you can scan it, the QR code. But the stakeholder mapping survey is live. OCBC is hosting this. The critical part of the planning phase is identifying the organizations and entities that could be involved and the role they may play in SURF. The stakeholder mapping survey is a key way we are gathering this information. And so you'll see here who is encouraged to participate in the survey. All HRTC members, sector leads, organizations involved in the group should complete the survey, as well as others identified by the sector stakeholder groups that should come on board and complete this survey. And when should we do this? As soon as possible. We're really trying to gather as much information as possible as soon as we can to make sure that that's informing the work as we move forward. We're also working on translating the survey, and we'll share it in other languages as soon as possible. Next slide, please. That does it for this portion of this gathering. Once again, I'm Lavera Alexander, Chief Strategy Officer for California Forward. You have my information here. I've also included Ish's information. He oversees the regional work, and that's really where SURF came from. It came from the regional work that the org and its partners have been moving forward. And so this is our information. If you have questions, never hesitate to reach out to either one of us or both, and we will, get you what you need as soon as we can. All right, next slide. So now we're moving into Q&A. And so I want to take down the presentation and open up the space so that we can just talk freely here and answer any questions that you may have about SURF, how it's unfolding, what you can do, how you show up in this space. Just really want to make sure that we have the opportunity to address any questions, concerns that you may have.
Yeah, I had just a quick question on the difference between